Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Stephen King podcast. This is episode 115, and I have with me my new traveling companion. She's got some magic of her own, Karen Lindsay, also known as Elevaria on the Twitter.
That's right.
And that's kind of a fairy tale name in itself, I think.
It is kind of, isn't it?
It's very elfish.
Yeah, well, and the game I play, which is where the name comes from, it had a lot of elves and stuff like that.
Right.
So, I mean, it is no wonder.
Does it have a special meaning? Or
Actually, this is the dumbest thing ever. When I first logged into World of Warcraft, which is where the name originated, it was forever ago, and I had never played an MMO. So what, 2005, 2006, something like that, a long time ago, right? I'd played many games, but just no MMOs. And so I was like, well, I don't know what to name her. And I just used the random generator. I waited until it said something that hit me. I use Lindsay sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Right.
I had a friend named Allison when I was young, and I always wanted her name. So when I saw Elevaria, I just said, okay, I'll take that one. So that's where it came from.
Right. Very cool. All right. So we're here today to talk about Stephen King's latest book, Fairy Tale. And warning up top for listeners, this will be a spoiler-filled review. We're not going to hold anything back. And want to know, Karen, what did you think of the latest tome by Mr. King?
Yeah, I loved it.
Great.
I really did. I could not wait to get through it, although there was part of me that was like, I don't want to finish it.
Right.
So at some point, probably next year, I'll reread it just because I enjoyed it. It was fun. Which is not normally the first word that comes to mind when you read a Stephen King book.
Right.
But I thought it was very fun and spellbinding.
Ah, nice. Nice. I like it.
And one of the main things that gets me with this book is that it's like two books in one.
Right.
There are movies that I've watched that seem like two different movies in one. One of them is Stripes.
Oh, yeah.
Where there's, they haven't signed up yet, and then they've signed up, and and then Full Metal Jacket is another one, where it's like boot camp and then Vietnam.
Very true.
So this seemed to me to be the same type of thing. There was the real world, and I'm doing air quotes, real world part of the book, and then the fantasy fairy tale part of the book.
Right.
And I thought they were both compelling in completely different ways. So just amazing, intricate, and like I said before, spellbinding, fun, everything rolled into one.
Cool. Yeah, I quite enjoyed it too. I split between listening to the audiobook and the book. And I started off listening to the audiobook, but then as time was pressing on me to get it done so we could do this, I had to switch to reading. But I really enjoyed the reading by Seth Numrich. I'm not really familiar with him, but he did a great job, and it really gets you into the characters, which I find with audiobooks, good narrators really do that. They really make the characters come to life with just minor changes in their speech and their inflection of their voices and that. So that was pretty cool. And I agree with you that it's two stories, but the book is broken down into, maybe 4, maybe 5 parts. And it takes almost half the book before you get into the actual fairy tale, the portion of the story. But I just love that King just shines in the early sections of the book that take place in the real world with the characters, and he really fleshes them out so that by the time we get into going to the fairy tale world, we're really invested in Charlie Reed and.
No, I'm sorry, Radar, of course. It was Radar more than Charlie for me. But I mean, I like Charlie.
Yeah,
but.
He's an interesting hero, and we'll talk about how King handled the fairy tale aspects of the story too. But overall, I quite enjoyed it. I found it did sag a little after Charlie got into the other world and after he met Dora, and then it felt like it was repeating itself a little bit until he actually set out on his quest to save radar. But from that point on, yeah, I was totally into it. And I just love how King interlocked or interweaved elements from the beginning of the story all the way right into the end. And it is a feel-good story, but it's not like a saccharine, diabetes-inducing fairy tale.
No.
There's a bit of an edge to it. And as an adult, I enjoyed that. And I think in today's world that it probably plays truer than if it was a more traditional fairy tale. And I'm doing air quotes again. So,
I mean, the original fairy tales were pretty dark.
Yes, they were.
So, I mean, the modern fairy tales.
Yeah.
So this is more like hearkening towards those. And I really enjoyed how he implied that some of the things from this world, alternate universe, whatever, I mean, he didn't really nail down what it was, that those had bled into our universe and became our fairy tales.
Yeah.
You know, there was the implication that might have happened. And I really enjoyed that a lot.
Yes, I totally agree. And King really acknowledges, and if it was a lesser writer, you'd almost say cribs from all the other fairy tales, but he puts his own spin on it, and it's a difficult juggling act, but I think overall he pulled it off fairly well. And he references, man, you name it. He references everything from Little Red Riding Hood to Rumpelstiltskin.
A Little Mermaid. There were a few others.
Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Yep.
Wizard of Oz. So yeah, there's a lot here. And in his opening acknowledgments, he says, thinking of REHERB and of course HPL. So those are initials of three famous writers that are featured heavily in this. And I really do like that King didn't delve too much into his own mythology. Like there was a couple of Dark Tower references. I don't know if you caught them. I don't know if you've read the Dark Tower, but there were a couple of them. But in general, he stayed away from that quite a bit. There are other worlds in these. That's a big Dark Tower mantra in that. And the horn with the stars in it is kind of a Dark Tower reference, which is again like a play on many worlds other than these. Really digs into the Lovecraft in the climax of the story, which was cool. And there's the whole quest portion of the story. There's the prison break. There's the revolt, the revolution, princesses. It's quite a mashup of a lot of different genres, and it seems easy to do, but to do it seamlessly like King does, I think is quite amazing.
I agree. And I would say the one genre that he skipped over was horror. I mean, there's a little bit in there,
a little bit,
but and that's his strength. And to stray from that and to go into all these other, that shows he's being super brave in doing that. And I think he pulled it off really well. Yeah.
Charlie's mom's death was pretty horrific.
Oh.
And King described that in maybe a little too much detail for the average reader.
Yeah.
I quite enjoyed it myself, but I have that streak in me, so I quite like that. But King always talks about he loves hiding the scene between fantasy and reality. In this one, it's a little bit more blatant, but given the nature of the story, you can't really hide it that way. But he still does introduce it slowly. We start out with the shed, of course, and the pellets. Mm-hmm. Never really did find out where those pellets came from. I was thinking it was from the rabbits or something like that.
They were in the wall of the palace. Yeah,
but where did they get them?
But I don't know.
Yeah, so that was interesting.
Yeah, maybe it was the rabbits.
he never
like
said.
The goose that laid the golden egg, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we start out with the story with Charlie Reed, and he's definitely a fictional character. I mean, King makes him come to life as much as possible, and I'm sure that there's people like that in the world. But for somebody to be so multifaceted as Charlie was, he's a jock, yet he likes to read, like he's into nerdy stuff. And he makes that promise to God about his mom, which I found was very, very compelling. And the fact that Charlie hung on to that and didn't share that with anybody, I really quite liked that aspect of the story. How did you feel about all that stuff?
Yeah, I thought that was super poignant. Mm-hmm. And he never told a single person about it.
No.
Like not even Howard. Mm-hmm. That he was paying his penance. And by the way, I was a jock I mean, I wasn't anymore, but I'm a nerd and I read a lot. So there are people like that out there. But I broke my leg, so, there's that.
Right.
Anyway, the fact that he feels like he's carrying such a burden was heartbreaking to me. And then when he admitted several times in the course of the book, you might think I'm the good guy, but I'm not. I did all these horrible things.
Yep.
And so my penance is to never waver from this promise I made and to make sure I can pay things back as much as I can. And I think even after he returns from Empis, he still is in that mindset of, now this is my life. This is how I'm going to be.
Yeah.
I'm going to be on the path of good. And I think that thread carries through the whole book. And it's almost like he's subverting himself by saying, I'm not a good guy. I'm not a good guy. He's always humble. I didn't save him. It was the dog. I didn't make the touchdown. I just carried it in. He's always that, I'm not a good guy. So he is almost too good to be true.
Yeah. In certain aspects.
But then not.
Yeah. He has a dark side because of some of the childhood stuff that he did with his buddy. Birdie. Yep. Birdie the bad boy.
That's right. Birdie Bird.
Yeah.
And by the way, just so you guys know, I don't have an eidetic memory. I remember most of the book. I remember the storyline, full stop. But I wrote down all the names.
Yeah.
So if you hear me coming back with a name, it's not me recalling it. I'm actually looking at a crib sheet.
Right. Which is good because I always have trouble with character names, as people have found out if they listen to this podcast for any length of time. So let's focus on the start of the story with Charlie and Bowditch, who,
sure,
in a way, feels like a gunslinger, like a Roland, how Roland was in the beginning of the Dark Tower series. And what I really like is that even though you kind of like Bowditch, but he is a bit of a prick, right?
Yeah.
And then you find out later on why, like almost near the end of the book, and which is great because then you come back to it and it recontextualizes everything that you thought about that character, which I really liked. And he kept Bowditch kept his whole backstory quite secret for quite a long time. And I thought that the relationship between those two characters and, of course, Radar really, in a way, if there wasn't a fairy tale aspect to the story, that just the relationship between those three characters could have carried a book on its own.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he typified the word curmudgeon. That was him in a nutshell. And I like how they set him up with Andy having heard Radar barking behind the fence when they were young. And that, he's this evil guy up in the Bates Hotel. And then all of a sudden he's pretty frail and his dog's old, and Charlie figures out, I've grown up, but also other things have grown older. So things don't seem as big as they were when I was little. And just seeing his total 100% empathy towards him from the very beginning was nice to see. He didn't start off suspicious of him or anything. He was just like, okay, I'm going to help you. And I thought that was great. And, he didn't hesitate. Not only am I going to help you, I'm going to go in, I'm going to feed your dog, I'm going to do whatever. And that was before he even found out that he was going to have to come and stay with him and all that stuff. So I really like that he wanted a connection, I think, where a lot of the adults in his life had let him down or gone away. And he wanted another connection, I think. And so he latches on anybody that might, maybe I can take something from you too. He's almost like a love sucker or something. He wants because of how he grew up. Right. I think it's really cool and he, again, just seems too good to be true. And it's even said in the book that, well, what's in it for you?
Right.
And he doesn't say anything. His motivation is that he's made this promise that he's going to make things up for everything he's done.
Mm-hmm.
But to everyone else, it just looks like he's like, what's wrong with him?
Mm-hmm.
You know, why is he the savior?
Right.
And that sets up really nicely for the other half of the book too.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So all the backstory that King builds up in the first half of the book really pays off in the second half, because if you take a typical 17-year-old and just thrust them into that other situation and emphasis in the fairy tale world, how much of that could they really handle? But here we've got a guy that has learned to be self-sufficient since 7 years old for a long stretch of time after his mother died and his father just drowned himself in the bottle. And it was great to see in this story that the father came back and that they had that relationship. But during that time period, Charlie met Birdie and they did some pretty terrible things. And that also, so Charlie's got the dark side to him, and he recognized that in Bowditch as well. And we find out over the course of the story much later that part of that reason for the way Bowditch is the era that he was born in. He was a logger, so he's used to being on his own, but also he used the wheel to turn his age back. So, and we didn't know at the time until the princess tells us that people that use that, they don't come back out the same. So it's like a little bit of the monkey's paw in a way too, riffing on that a little bit. So there's just so many influences to the story. I was just like going, oh man, this is so cool. That's cool. This is cool. So Charlie's set up with this set of parameters that you believe that because of what he went through, he's more mature than his years. You know that he's got this dark passenger, and you know because he kept this promise that he would help Bowditch because he wanted to repay that debt vow that he made to God, that if his father got sober, that he would do something in kind for some and pay it forward, basically. So all that backstory setup really pays off in the second half of the book. And for people that say backstory is boring, I think this is the way that you do it. Yeah, it's just so necessary to build up the character so that we can understand why he behaves the way that he does. Because if we didn't know all this stuff about Charlie, we would just say, "Well, this guy's just like a Mary Sue or something." Like, how can he handle?
Never believe it.
Yeah, how can he handle all this stuff? So I really like all that stuff in the first half of the book. And King just has a way with characters that I just marvel at. Like every time, every time I read a book, like you just you lose yourself, and the characters just really become alive. And Charlie is like a 6'4", 225 jock kind of character, and he's a big dude, at least in the start of the story. So he's got the size going for him, but you wonder about him too. Like, is he going to turn to the dark side? Because he breaks that guy's not just one wrist, but he breaks both of them. Still,
I mean, well deserved in my opinion, but
Yeah. So the first third of the story or half of the story is really strong, like I said, and it could stand as a story on its own if I don't know where King would have taken it. And of course, King's a dog owner and he knows how to play on the, the pet emotions. And for anybody that's had a pet and seen them age and die out, we just went through that with our last dog last year, Bella. We had her for 13 years and they just go downhill so fast. And so I was totally buying into the time pressure that King was building into the story, that Charlie had to get Radar to the wheel before in short order. And that was driving it as well. Is there anything else from the first part of this real world that should bring up?
Well, one of the things that gets me about, especially the real world part of this book, every character has depth.
Yeah.
Every character.
Yeah.
Althea Richland, the lady across the street.
Oh, yeah. Miss Nosy Parker.
Could you not picture her in your head?
Yeah.
Melissa, the PT girl.
Yeah. I thought she was going to come back in the story, to be honest.
I thought so too. But I thought maybe she and Charlie would get together or something.
But she was a bit older than him. So.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Still, hello.
Hello, yeah.
Girls could do that.
Oh, yeah.
And Heinrich. How much did you hate Heinrich from the first minute that he was like, ooh, tell me where he got the gold? I mean,
he reminded me of Peter Lorre or something.
Very much so. And so, like, everybody has flavor. Everybody.
Yeah.
And that just amazes me, because there are a lot of authors that are lauded that don't do as much character and world building.
Right.
And he goes above and beyond.
Yeah.
So, and, in the second half, that there's going to be lore around them. But in the first half, where it's like real world, he could have blown off some of those characters, but he didn't. He made sure to tell us everything about them. So,
yeah. He just does such a good job that you could almost, like those supporting characters that you just mentioned, you can almost see them in a Hammer horror movie or something like that. So like King's riffing on all the stuff that he grew up with, but you don't feel like it's cliche or condescending in any way. Like it's not like when you watch the Phantom Menace and everybody's an alien race, but they are, these are the Jewish people, these are the Italian people, these,
exactly right.
This is just, they're just characters that happen to have these characteristics. So I really enjoyed all of that stuff. And it's pretty cool that this all plays into all this mythos that the King is building into this. And I like the point that he makes. It's not just that there's tropes or magic or whatever you want to call it in Empus, but there is in our world too, but it's just that because it's there, we just take it for granted. So I love that point.
Yeah, me too.
That was excellent.
I think about that often, that like people from 200 years ago, if they saw a smartphone, they would think that we were wizards.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's magic everywhere. And
because of the generation King's from, he still has to do a little bit of a dig about how much Charlie is dependent upon his phone. I thought that was kind of, it's too bad it didn't work on Empus. That would have been funny to see the other characters.
Get off my lawn. Yeah, he's got to do that a little bit.
I can't think of anything else too major from the first part of the story. I think we've covered most of it. A lot of great characters. The repetition of the goddamn bridge and that stuff which plays out in the fairy tale part too is good. He just repetitions stuff enough that it sticks with you. I think it's a rule of three. You have to mention something 3 times before somebody takes notice and says, "Oh, this must be important." So yeah, because then it becomes goddamn something else later on in the story, whatever. So
exactly.
So then we take the journey into the shed, down the stairs, through the tunnel. And there's a little bit of a weebly wobbly moment, and we assume that's timey-wimey, and that's, we assume, the threshold point where Charlie and Radar pass over into Empus. And they come out into a field of red poppies, and if you're a Stephen King Dark Tower fan, that field of red poppies has an enormous implication, but because that's where the Dark Tower sits, and the Dark Tower is the nexus of all known worlds, but that's as far as King takes it. So,
there you go.
And he references it, but he quickly puts it down. There's no yellow brick gold road in this story. So I like that too. And of course, the first character he meets is Dora, who's basically like the old mother in the shoe character, and she makes shoes. So there you go. And I enjoyed her, but when they started moving on to the additional characters, what was his name? Do you know off the top of it?
Which one?
The one that couldn't see?
Stephen Woodley. So his nickname was Woody.
Right. Which is... And then the princess who couldn't talk. So you have these 3 characters, Leah. And Dora couldn't, and Leah of Leia. So we have Dora, Woody, and Leia. Hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. So we've got that.
And Claudia.
Yeah. And
Claudia, who yelled everything.
Yes.
Which was funny to have everything in all caps.
Yeah, it got annoying after a while. I'm glad King decided that later in the book to dial that back, but I thought he could have dialed that back a bit quicker, actually. Yeah, but she didn't talk that much, but it was like, okay.
No.
So those 4 characters, they were interesting because they represent the royalty or the royal family of this world. And we find out through them, and this is where King's mixing reality and fantasy, they're not perfect characters either. Well, how did you find that?
Well, I think I know it's an allegory to our current situation where even the good guys aren't good. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get into specifics, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But like, you go from the bad guy who was elected last time to the good guy who's elected this time, but you're frustrated because the good guy he's not doing stuff the way you want it to be done, but he's still better than the other guy. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if anyone wants to draw from that. But yeah, I mean, it's like real life. Mm-hmm. There are bad guys.
Yep.
And there are, I guess, good guys. I mean, if you want to talk about Gandhi and people like, although Gandhi did horrible things too. Okay, am I right on that? That Gandhi might not have been as...
I can't address that. But I wouldn't be surprised if he had some...
Yeah. He wasn't perfect, put it that way. But most everyone in the world, if you're not just evil for the sake of being evil or a sociopath or whatever, you're gray.
Yep.
You do some good things, you do some bad things. And I think that was part of his narrative there, in that, hey, they're not just going to be the fairy tale prince and princess that can do no wrong. Mm-hmm. They're people. In that world, they're just people. They ruled their land and that's it. They weren't fantasy tales,
right?
Birds landing on the shoulder and dwarves gathering and people singing as they walk down the road. And I enjoyed that because it did ground that fantasy story in a bit of real life.
Yep.
So, and also that someone who might have been good being so bullied that it pushes them into this evilness.
Yeah.
And that people bullied him that were on the good side.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's you can see exactly what he's doing with that without him coming out and banging you over the head with it.
Yeah. And generally he does that pretty seamlessly, and he every once in a while he just comes right out and makes it obvious. He says like this, like the Yellow Brick Road reference and things like that, but it's done in such a way that it doesn't take you out of the story. It's just like this teenager would be thinking like he's equating all these things to pop culture references and that. So it works quite well. I was pretty pleased with that. So, and the thing about those four main characters from Impus is that they're not perfect. They all could have done something to change the situation, but they needed an outside force to make them take the next step, which was represented by the Charlie. So the princess pretty well knew that the bad guy was her brother. So, but she just didn't want to take that next step. And the other people were her advisors, and they just never spoke up to her. So that it was just, it just brings that extra level of reality to it that I like. And for better or for worse, it's part of the cynical times that we live in too, that people are like that. And we've seen that quite obviously. A lot of good people just looking the other way and letting bad things happen. So it's something that's happened all through the ages, and it's certainly nothing unique to just today's world, but it's part of human nature. And that's stuff that King notices and incorporates into a story. So I really liked how that played out, actually. And especially with the princess, because that could have been set up as a storybook ending too, that Charlie and the princess, got married and ruled the land together, but she's still feeling the guilt about not acting on her brother. And so she says, every time I look at you, I'm reminded of my error. So I like that too.
Me too. I wouldn't have wanted him to stay there.
Right.
So I was hoping, for one thing, I was heartbroken about his dad. And I was like, okay, he's got to get back to his dad.
Yeah.
And I just thought, okay, maybe he's in love with her, but I think she doesn't have that capacity anymore. She's hardened and by all the things that have gone around her. And then her brother being the bad guy, I think, was just the last straw, and that she's just going to wall herself off, going to do her duty, and hopefully make the land better for the next generation.
Yeah. The next part of the story is focused on Charlie getting radar to the wheel. And that's probably the more sustained section of not really horror, but dread, because he's basically following the breadcrumbs for Bowditch with his initials. So, and then you get all this cool stuff gets into the city, and he opens the gate, which is like the Black Gate of Mordor and all this stuff. So, he just keeps ripping off all this stuff, and he gets into that city. It's a big maze, and you hear voices, and he's looking out for the night soldiers, and the tension's there because he's got to get it done before it gets dark and get out of there. So that's all cool. And I quite like that section. And then he gets all the way to the courtyard where the giant is. Hannah, and she's quite imposing character. So the
pretty lady,
Jack and the Beanstalk stuff going on there. So that that's all fun stuff. And then just to top it off, we get the Little Mermaid riff as well with the
That's right.
with the mermaid in the pool, the dead mermaid, Elsa. So I quite enjoyed that section, and the whole thing with Radar on the wheel being de-aged. Yeah, that's so much the carousel from Something Wicked This Way Comes. So all that stuff was really good, and you were hoping that it would work, of course, and you knew it would work. But then the king has to throw in that little bit of tension about, he's got to get off there. He's going to get too young.
Right.
So that was fun.
And you say, it's got to work. He knew it was going to work. No, I didn't, because Stephen King is not that nice all the time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was my fervent hope that Radar was going to get young again, because she's a good doggy.
Yep.
I feel like I connected with her, and I'm not even like a big dog person.
Yeah, I'm surprised how.
I love dogs.
Right.
I do. I love them.
But you're a cat person.
We live in apartments.
Right.
And I've never wanted to confine a dog to an apartment. Right. If we had a house, we'd probably have a dog.
Yeah.
But I loved her so much. So that boy and his dog quest for the good, and got to get to the, and it's like he was in a labyrinth. He had to follow the rules of the labyrinth in order to get to the prize, which was to make Radar young again.
Right.
And that was, I thought, probably one of the highlights of the book for me, was his whole following the breadcrumbs, like Hansel and Gretel, Jack and the Beanstalk with Hannah, who's very fee-fi-fo-fum-y. And then there's that dark turn where he sees Ariel. It's not Ariel, but Elsa. And he realizes that it's not this fairy tale. It's, something terrible has happened. And I think that's his foot is stepping back into reality. It's such an adventure, this and this and this, and I've got it, and I'm gonna win. And then he sees this dead mermaid, and he realizes, okay, I got to get out of here. So I did like that was his reality check. At that point. And then later on, it comes back again that it's a reality check.
Yes.
For Leah as well.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of interlocking stuff in here that it's going back and forth between earlier parts of the book and later parts and that. So that all works out quite well. And King he's good at foreshadowing too, because he says, I looked at the mermaid and I'm glad I did because it was important later on. And you're going, oh, okay, why is it important later on?
Right.
So he does that quite well. It's a neat little trick. With a lot of writers, if you do that, it takes the tension out of the story. But with him, it adds another.
It adds.
Yeah.
To it.
So it's quite. He does that quite deftly. So I really enjoy that. And then, of course, the journey out. You knew it wasn't going to be as easy, but you just was wondering how messed up it would get. And then, of course, we have the Rumpelstiltskin character. What's his name? Peterkin. Yeah. So he's erased some of the initial so that Charlie loses his way.
What a jerk, right?
Yeah. And at this point, I thought Radar had bitten a piece of clothing off of Peterkin. And I thought to myself, why doesn't he let Radar smell that and say home or something like that and get out of there? But that happens later on. But I thought he could have done it there, but I guess it just didn't serve the story. So
yeah. How would he have been caught?
Exactly. Yeah.
He didn't think of it. I mean, would you have thought of it right off the bat if you were him? Yeah.
No, but it was the same thing with and we'll get into that next section with the prison guards. When they finally got to the solution that they did, why didn't they try that earlier?
Right.
But again, like you said, it doesn't serve the story at that point. So the fact that Charlie loses the trail and gets totally lost ends up with him doing the mad dash, trying to get out of there. And then one of the better real Kingsian horror piece is the run through the cemetery. And I'm going, all right, here we go. Here's Stephen King back in his home ground. Yep. Charlie's got to go through the cemetery.
And could you not see the hands
coming out of the
reaching
ground?
Out? Yeah.
I was thinking like a Thriller from Michael Jackson or something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Or Carrie at the end of the Carrie movie. Yeah, so that was a great sequence there as well. And then he gets caught, and then we enter into another phase of the book, which becomes like the Hunger Games.
Right.
Yeah. So
or Gladiator.
Or Gladiator, yeah. So and then a whole another new cast of characters, which we get to learn about and get to know and love pretty quickly.
Yeah, they sucked me in right away.
Yeah.
And this was a pretty small part of the book, to be honest, when you're talking about the whole book as a whole,
Yeah.
But man, I was gutted when half of them were gone right away.
Yeah.
I mean, it was wrenching.
Yeah.
Especially Iota.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the other one? Hamey.
Hamey, yeah. Hamey hit the hardest because he was Charlie's cellmate. So
right.
And he was in such difficulty right off the bat that
yeah,
it was, you knew it was coming, and that made it worse, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah,
because Jaya was the one who had to take him out.
Yeah.
But she had to play with him first because the audience wouldn't have believed it. And it changed her, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sad, just sad.
It was. And then we get elements of what I think was King Riffenhoff of The Great Escape, the Steve McQueen, James Garner prison break movie.
Yeah.
And they get help from the cook. Percival, yeah.
Percy,
yeah.
Yeah.
And they are able to escape on the second day through finally doing the most obvious thing is throwing water on the guards.
Right.
And they blew up real good.
Wizard of Oz,
yeah, the water. Yeah, exactly. And that leads to that whole fun sequence through the passageways. Then they get out into the trolley station, and then they all have to make a break for the gate. And then we get the whole cool thing with the moths, that's another element that King's called on quite often, is forces of nature.
Yeah.
Coming in to help out at opportune moments. So, which is like the eagles from Lord of the Rings, I guess you could say.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Why didn't the eagles just carry him?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So that was all good stuff. And by the time you get to the end of that sequence, all these characters from the prison that you were unsure of at the beginning, they're all part of the fellowship of the Charlie Reed Brigade, I guess you could say.
Right.
So, just a lot of characters in this novel. And King just really makes all of them stand out in one way or another.
Yeah, none of them are throwaway characters.
Yeah, Emmett and Iota. They were all good characters. And again, I was like you, I was gutted when Iota died. I thought at this moment, I thought this is old style King, because this is a pretty brutal takedown.
Right.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
And it was although I wanted Cla to die big time.
Yeah.
I'm glad that Charlie was so violent with him. And again, that's mirroring the fact that he could be cruel to the guy who killed whatever, the guy who wanted the gold.
Right.
In the real world. And it turned around that, okay, well that, he could kill Claw because of what he did in the real world. So I like that whole Fight Clubby sort of thing. And the fact that they bonded quickly over that. And that's why they're so easily drawn into this whole I'll help you because we're part of the same team.
Yeah. And during this sequence, Charlie starts to undergo his princely transformation, becoming the big blue-eyed, blonde-haired Disney prince.
Right.
So that was interesting. And it was funny. King was always referencing how Charlie was hearing things, but we were hearing them in English, but in his head they were sounding differently, and certain things wouldn't translate, and that was fun too. King's playing with the language there. I always like it when he does that, and he tried to say amaze balls or something, and he couldn't. Yeah. He couldn't say it. Yeah. So I really liked that sequence. I thought it was totally different than the other parts of the book, but it was integrated seamlessly, and I was totally into it. And King had to go through that first day where half of them were lost, and you were invested because you had come to like these characters. I mean, the way he makes you turn on like Iota at the beginning, I thought, boy, this guy's going to be a problem. He's a real prick, right? But by the end, he ended up being probably Charlie's best friend out of the prisoners. So yeah,
and I like how he sets up that it may be these 2 days that really bond them, cement their friendships, but they all have to like be these, I don't care about you. I'm just going to train. We're going to eat. We're going to laze around. We're going to talk smack about each other.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's like the stakes couldn't be higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what makes them into this. We're on one side and they're on the other side. So, and that, there was a part of me that was filled with this, okay, I'm going to use a 10-cent word, ennui, because this was the time that made it so that Charlie was deemed missing from the real world, because it was several months that he was incarcerated. And so not only was he tortured and put through all this and jaded and you know, all these things happening, you know, tortured, but he also knew in the back of his head that his father was probably thought he was dead. So, I mean, there's all these things coming at him. Yeah. And I did like how they kept trying to call him a prince. And he was like, don't, and I understand, don't call me a prince out loud because the guards will seize on it. But also don't call him a prince because he doesn't want that. Yeah. You know, he doesn't feel like a prince.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
And you bring up a good point there. I like that while he's in prison, he's thinking about his dad. I was wondering during that portion of the book, was time moving on the same rates in both worlds? And we found out later on that it did. But yeah. So, but I was just wondering, like, if he was going to come out and it was like maybe just 2 weeks in the real world, but it wasn't. It seems to be matched pretty closely. And he also sets up the tension that you think he might stay because if it goes the way a fairy tale goes, they all live happily ever after. It doesn't mean you have to be together, but generally it does. But if he stays, that would make him a bit of a prick again because he knows that his dad is out there waiting for him and he might start up drinking again if he doesn't come back. So that's a nice touch as well. So I really thought that was quite beautifully set up because of what happened in the first part of the book.
Yeah, me too. That was in my head too. Yeah. Is I was like, okay, and I'm trying to, I'm torn at this point when I'm reading it. I'm thinking, okay, do I want him to stay or do I want him to go home? Because do you want him to have the HEA with the princess or do you want him to go back home and live out the rest of his life? Yeah. And I thought it was perfect the way it was done. Yes. Yep. But yeah, it was, for a minute there, I was like, I don't know which one I want it to
be. Yeah, for sure. The interesting thing about this part of the story was a big tonal shift for me, and I don't know how you felt about it, but when Charlie's captured, from that point in the story onward, while the dog comes back into the story after Charlie escapes, it didn't. The emphasis wasn't the same on the dog as it was for the rest of the book, which I found a little jarring because I kept on waiting for Radar to have some big moment or something like that. Or I thought maybe he was going to die or maybe throw himself at the monster at the end or something because it's King, right? So
I know. Yeah, I had the same thought.
But at a certain point, this is a people story. It's not a dog story. So you have to switch the focus away from Radar to what's happening in MP. So, but it still was a little jarring. And I missed having Radar more in the action, so to speak. Did you have that or?
Yeah, there was a time. And I think it was, first of all, he sends Radar away when he gets caught. And he's like, go, 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 which is, you hang a lantern on that, Radar's going to be the one to help save him, which he did in a roundabout way. They realized that Charlie didn't come back and Radar did. So what can we do? Yeah. But from that point on, he's kind of MIA until the epilogue where it's the real world again. Yeah. So I am thinking, I don't know how to read into that, except that they had to do all the people stuff at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Pulling Radar in to do something big would have just taken away from those relationships that were going on between the people. And it's not like he hand-waved Radar away. He was mentioned. She was mentioned several times. Sorry, all dogs are boys and all cats are girls.
I can agree with that.
That's what I grew up thinking for some reason.
Yeah.
But But Radar was a good dog. And I would like to think that maybe he didn't bring Radar back into the story so that we didn't worry about her.
Probably. Yeah.
Which was a good thing.
Yeah, from that perspective, I agree. And I also think the problem is when you have like a character that doesn't talk or can't communicate in the spoken word, doing scenes with that really slows down the pace.
Right.
And so a lot of it had to do with pacing at that point because the story, King wanted to keep the tension up. Are they going to succeed or not? So, but if you bring the dog in too much beyond just petting it once in a while or having it bark, beyond that was really all he could spare with without slowing bogging the story down. So, but it was noticeable to me, and oddly enough, it was probably the biggest shift that threw me the most. But,
was not seeing Radar in that part.
Yeah.
It went really fast, though.
Yes, it did. And we also got in this section, we got a payoff for something that King set up near the beginning when Charlie came into the world with, what was it, the Rumpelstiltskin's name again?
Peterkin.
Peterkin and the cricket.
Mm-hmm.
So the cricket.
The snab. The
snab was the magical gizmo.
He even called the snab Jiminy Cricket at one point.
Yeah. But the snab was just the magical talisman or object in this because it would show up at the most opportune times with notes and whatnot. So, but that was okay. And it's a fairy tale, right? So you go with it. I didn't mind it.
And what other way he has to have some mechanism to do these things. So and that it's almost set up not just from Peterkin, but Claudia even mentions that she knew that Charlie was coming because of the snab. And that was after Peterkin had been pulling the legs off, but he didn't, it was just some cricket.
Right, yeah.
And you didn't really put together that cricket was the snab that Claudia was talking. You didn't really put everything together, but I was thinking the snab may have done his magical thing so that people realized that Charlie was this good guy. He's coming to help, that sort of thing. Yeah.
So that section all plays out and they escape. And then we set up for the overthrow, which brings in the characters that Charlie met when he first came in, Princess and Dora and Clara and Woody. And they're going to lead the revolt. Princess Leia is going to finally step up to the plate and do the things that she should have done a long time ago. So that all plays out. And this section of the book was, the payoff was good. I don't think it was my favorite part of the story by any means because it can only play out in so many ways. And at this point, it's just a matter of how King stages it and carries out the action. And I thought he did a pretty cool job with describing the creature that was coming out of the hole. And that was all pretty well done. And the Lovecraftian stuff was pretty cool. So I thought that stuff was okay, but it was my least. It's kind of like the action scene in a movie, right? Like, we can all marvel at Gandalf leading the charge down the slopes to eradicate the orcs at Helm's Deep, but it's the moments where Sam and Frodo are talking, or where Merry's talking to Gandalf about what happens after you die, and Gandalf's talking about going to the White Shores beyond and all that. So those are the moments that stand out more to me in the story.
Sure.
Maybe when I'm younger. If I was younger, I think this section might have resonated or hit with me more, but it was good. I didn't mind it. It played out. It was great to see everybody get their comeuppance and the princess make the stand that she had to make. And it was good. Yeah,
I can picture vividly some of the scenes from that part. I mean, throughout the whole book, yes, but that elevator where they were claustrophobic in there. So I can picture that. I can picture the wall with all the pellets in it.
Yeah.
And then after Petra bites Charlie and he's recovering, I could picture that. And it was just crazy. And is it he who should not be named, Gog Magog? Are we not supposed to say that out loud, right?
Well, too late now.
Don't say it 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty descriptive, I thought. And then, of course, seeing Eldon, how he was transformed by it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an allegory in itself.
Yeah.
If you're bad, if you're evil, you look evil from the outside too.
Yeah.
So, and as I alluded to earlier, when Charlie gets back to the well that second time when he's with his group and they're on their quest to save the land, he realizes, okay, everybody else stay back. Leah, come with me. And he shows her Elsa in the pond. And he makes sure that has huge impact on her. And that's where she breaks down. And that was where she realized, and she says, well, it can't be my brother because he loved Elsa. But I think in her head, she realized, okay, I'm going to have to kill him if he's the bad guy. And I think that solidified her strength, which was a brilliant turn to write that. And again, they placed the lantern on him, seeing her in the well, and then they mention her. And then
Yeah, it's a fairly intricate plotted book. I don't know. King's a discovery writer, so I don't know if he was carrying all these hooks in his head and got it down the first time, or if we had to go back and in subsequent drafts make those hooks more seamless or strengthen them as required. So, yeah, I really liked the climax was really well done, but I actually enjoyed the recovery section of the story more, where Charlie's recovering from his wound to his arm, and all the people coming in to visit him and dropping little drops of wisdom or whatnot. And King's just tying up story ends for all these characters and what they're going to be doing in that. And continuing the theme of adding a layer of intermixing reality with fantasy, in that it's not like everybody's not just going to be miraculously cured. The gray is going to totally go away. People will recover to a certain extent, but they will also continue to bear the scars of what went on before. So I like stories where there's a price to be paid, and this is done in that style, much like Frodo has to go to the Grey Havens at the end. These people are going to retain shades of gray.
Yep.
Not that kind of shades of gray, but
no, the actual color gray.
The actual color
and
gray.
I think it's telling that King wrote this during the pandemic, and it's almost like he's saying it's going to take us a long time to get over this. So there was a little bit of that pulled in as well. And
nice, yeah.
Even on Charlie's end, where he's going to have this disfigurement.
Yeah.
It's not going to magically go away. It's not healed by fairy dust.
Yeah.
There's consequences to things that happen. And that's a very real world thing to do.
Yeah.
A fairy tale wouldn't be like that. A fairy tale, Tinkerbell would come and ding, and his arm would be healed. And
And that's where a lot of the payoffs between the interlocking storylines comes in this section of the book. So I really liked how that all paid off. And as I mentioned earlier, the price that's paid if you use the wheel to de-age yourself is how when we find out about affected Bowditch. And we know that it did, because Bowditch said there was a price to pay.
Yep.
So Bowditch knew after making himself younger that he had been changed in a certain fundamental way. And if not for fate, and King calls it Ka in the Dark Tower, the life of Bowditch would have ended in obscurity and nobody would have known about him. But fate intervened, and Charlie was there when he fell and broke his ankle or his leg, and all the things that Bowditch was carrying around was passed on to Charlie. Yep. And it's also marks at the return of Charlie into the real world, the fact that later on he covers up the hole and pours concrete over, because he said, why didn't Bowditch do that? And well, it was because he might want to go back and turn the wheel again.
That's right.
So that's basically Charlie's putting that part of his life behind him as well.
Yep.
And he's accepted what happened there, and he's going to move on. So, and he wanted to keep that experience to himself again, which is because it was part of his vow for payback, that you can understand that why he would want to treasure that.
Yeah. And also not when he takes his dad down there just to prove that it's real and says, we're not going to go on an introduction tour. I'm just showing you it's real.
Yeah.
It's not just that he wants to keep it to himself. I think there's that, definitely. But he also doesn't want his dad to bear that burden.
All right.
Hey, you can say that you've seen it in your head, and that's it. I'm not going to make you live through any of this or see what I went through. So it's real. Now we're going to cover it up. Yeah. So I really appreciated that it's part of his redemption tour.
Yeah.
To make sure that someone knows, but doesn't have to take on that burden.
Mm-hmm. King always has a couple of pearls of wisdom spread out through his book. The one that really stuck out to me the most was right near the end when he's talking about what happened to Polly and in the real world, that he was found dead under underpass, and he probably couldn't defend himself because both his wrists were broken, and he wasn't trying to feel guilty about it, but he says, I can't help feeling sorry and ashamed. You may say I have no reason to feel shame, that I did what I had to do to save my life and the shed secret, but shame is like laughter and inspiration. Mm-hmm. It doesn't knock. So, and there's a couple of other pieces like that, gold like that in the story, but I'll leave that for you guys to find out or pick up on your own. But yeah, that's King. He has a way of turning a phrase, and it comes out at it's not just characters. Sometimes it's just describing setting or themes or whatever, but he has a way of doing it that just makes it stick out. And it's just like, he doesn't do it with flowery language. He's not, he can write elegantly, and that you can sit back and say, wow, that was really slick. But he doesn't push that aspect of writing very often. Like, he's not aiming to be a literary writer. Like, you'll read another writer's book and you'll just like, wow, this stuff is, the way this sentence is put together and the words that are being used are just amazing. But King's more focused, or his priority is on weaving a good story. And so his language tends to be more colloquial and clean. Best way to describe it. And I mean, there's once or twice he pulled out some $5 words like mephitic. I had never heard of that word before, and kept on pulling that one out, and I had to look it up. Right. And I said, okay.
Well, here's the joy in reading it on a tablet. Yeah. Where I could just press on a word and it would come up.
Yeah. So that's the book. I mean, he gets back home and his dad's still sober. So all that's all good. And he's got Radar back with him, and, Radar's 6-9 years younger than the start of the story. So he gets to live out of another life with a new owner. And Charlie goes to school to ends up becoming a teacher, or in school to be a teacher. And he carries the scar, as you mentioned, with his wrists. And that's the end of the story. For Charlie, it's just back to living a normal life.
Quote unquote normal, yeah.
Yeah, King locked it down pretty good with any idea of a sequel by pouring that steel and concrete over the hole. I mean, if they wanted to badly enough, they could get through there, but it's more to keep the other world in. And so it's King just wanted to write a happy story, and for King,
pretty happy.
This is a pretty happy story, with a tinge with a bit of realism, but overall it was quite a enjoyable read. I had the most trouble with when Charlie was going from Dora to Claudia. Woody to Claire to Claudia to Leia. That part of the story bogged down a bit for me. But other than that, I will always prefer King's more traditional fiction. This is an adult version of Eye of the Dragon, I think. And there's a couple of nice tie-ins to The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Belt, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that was...
As soon as that came out, I was going, that was like,
even I caught that one.
Yeah. So that's all. That was all well and done. But for a guy that's been writing as long as he has, he maybe this last 10 years, so he's pulled more from stuff that he's done before than he ever did in his career. But it's still done elegantly, and I don't mind it. And I think if you stuck with anything long enough, or an artist or whatever, you like those callbacks because it's it's like a comfort sweater, right? Like that's where you go back
thanks,
to it.
That's for me. You put that in there for me. I get it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So even if he repeats, I mean, all stories there's only so many different ways to tell a story. So, but he doesn't out and out just do like volume 21 in a series of 23 novels that are all basically the same murder mystery kind of thing. It's everything he does is different, and you can tell he's well read because he really pulls in elements from so many different storytellers, Lovecraft or Heinlein or Bradbury. It's pretty amazing. I think the only thing that's a little too convenient is all his protagonists tend to be readers. So they're familiar with all these literary, or they can make these literary references that a normal person wouldn't.
Hard to hate readers, though. I mean, right.
It's hard to hate readers if you're a reader, right?
We have that built-in sympathy for them already. Is we understand that. Yeah, exactly.
And we get the references, so we get, so we like that when he makes those references. But it is convenient.
It's his story. he's allowed to be convenient.
Yeah.
I thought it was really fresh for him. And you might not say that because there are so many other elements drawn in from other storytellers, but I think it's more like an homage to all those different things that he loves, all rolled into this fresh story. And I thought that was really cool. You can just see that he loves hard. The things that he loves hard because he knows them in and out. And it's just great.
Yeah. Yeah. So overall, I give this a strong recommendation. It's a little too early for me to say where it sits in his pantheon of books, but it's in the upper half for sure. I don't think it's in the top 10, but it's up there, and it's a nice change of pace and a big surprise for all of us because we constant readers were expecting his next big book to be the next Holly Gibney story. So we assume that will be the one that's coming out next year as his novel, but he always throws surprises in. I mean, we have to be thankful that he's still writing at 75 years of age.
You know what happens when you assume?
It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
I've been watching
each one of these books is a gift.
And Moira says, you know what happens when you assume? You make an ass out of all of us.
That's good. That's a good update. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So, any last thoughts, Karen?
No, I'd highly recommend this as well. Even to people that aren't like King devotees. I think if you like fantasy, science fiction, any genre book, there's elements of all of that in this. And I think you would find at least part of it really super good. Even if you had to get through parts of it that aren't your cup of tea, there's something in here for anybody who's a genre reader.
All right. Very good. So that wraps up our talk of Fairy Tale. I hope you all enjoyed it. And what will we be doing next? I think I posed a question to you, Karen. What is your favorite Stephen King story, movie, whatever? That will be the basis for our next episode. If you can't answer now, that's fine. But
no, I'm still thinking. So there's a lot.
Okay. Cool.
There is a lot.
Cool. And we'll try to be back in a couple of weeks. Hopefully you guys all enjoy this. We're looking at over an hour of content so far. I think by the time I edit it down, it will be still over an hour. So that will be cool. And I will try to get this out ASAP.
Excellent.
But until then, Karen, where can people find you on the interwebs?
As we mentioned early in the podcast, I am at Oliveria on the Twitter machine. And I just updated the links page on my blog. So
nice.
Click on that link in my bio and you'll find all my links.
Awesome. And of course, if you're listening to this, you know that I post all these things on YouTube at Lou's Reviews, along with our Babylon 5 and our JKL, that's Jesse, Karen, Lou Media, where we do one-off series. We've done Midnight Mass and Devs. And our next one will be Station 11. So look forward to that coming up. And until then, stay safe, but stay scared.
Bye.
And
see.